Now that we've got the sculpting done for our mesh, let's take a look at how we can start to set up some textures. So let's jump into Mudbox, and this is 17 start if you want to start from here. Otherwise, you can start with your current progress on your model. And so what we want to do now is start to set this up for texturing. We've got the sculpt in there, and we want to start to do some painting. Now, the first thing that I'll do is go ahead and start to separate the different pieces based on different materials. So we have Lamberts assigned to some of these pieces, but I'm going to go ahead and assign some Mudbox materials to these different pieces. So let's choose the hair. I'll just right click and I want to assign a new material, Mudbox material. Okay, so it's going to assign this new material. I'm going to go ahead and actually choose a black just so it looks a little bit more like what we want it to actually look like. Okay, but the color that we'll eventually put on here will come from the actual texture map, which we don't have any paint layers on here currently. So we can now come down, and I'm just going to name this material, and let's just call this hair material. Let's do the same thing up here. So basically everything that we want to have its own texture, we want to have a separate material. So I'm going to assign a new material, Mudbox material. Let's make this one kind of dark red for now, just temporarily. And we'll come down here and rename this. Call this headband material. Let's also add a material for the eyes. So I'll go ahead and assign new Mudbox material. This one I'll go ahead and just make it white. And I'll rename this eyes material. All right, now let's just continue down. I'm going to go ahead and add a new material for the face. And I'll go ahead and leave that color actually. That'll be fine. And then come down and rename it. We'll call this head material. And then the gums, a new Mudbox material. This time we'll give it kind of a dark pink. And then we'll rename this as well. So you just want to go through all of your pieces, add materials to everything that you want to be separate, and add materials to those. We'll just do the same thing here, make it white. Now once we've added these materials, we've removed the materials that were on there, so you can go ahead and delete those. So we can come through here and start to delete these materials that were in here. So we can go ahead and delete all of these, just clean things up a bit. And I'm going to delete this extra camera from our back and forth between Maya and Mudbox. Okay, so now we have separate materials set up for each of the different pieces that we're going to have separate textures on. So the head's going to have a texture map, the bandana, the head is going to be on one, and then the eyes as well. Okay, now to prepare our model to actually start to get textures, we need to think about how those textures are going to be created. There's a couple of ways that we can create textures here in Mudbox. We can do very basic UV-based texture maps, which means that the texture map will be a flat image that's painted based on a particular UV layout, which we can manually create in Maya, or we can automatically create here in Mudbox. We can also use something called PTEX, which doesn't require UVs. Now you need to think about how you're going to get this through the pipeline and what kind of pipeline you're using before you start using this. Now you can use PTEX without having any UVs. You can go in and start just painting immediately. You can just set that resolution for each face basically and start painting away. Now, there is the ability to come in and convert that to a UV based texture later on, but you also have options for actually taking the PTEX texture all the way through to the rendering process. Now it is you have a smaller number of applications that you'll be able to use. If you're going to be rendering in RenderMan, for instance, you should be able to use PTEX. Some other applications you won't be able to. So that's just something to keep in mind. But we can just take a look at some of the options that we have here. So let's say, for instance, let me just select the teeth and let me isolate those. Let's say we don't want to have any UVs on the teeth. but we do want to maybe paint a texture. So we can go in to Mesh and go to PTEX Setup. And we want to make sure that we're at level 0 first. And so let me go ahead and select that. Let's go to PTEX Setup. Now you're going to get a little box here that's going to give you kind of an indication. All you want to do is examine the little pattern that shows up on your mesh, and you just want to make it the correct sharpness. So if it's a little bit blurry, you want to make it sharper. If it's too sharp, you don't need all that detail, you can decrease the resolution. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. So you can see I can come in here, and if I want to decrease the resolution, you can see how that makes that a little bit blurrier. Maybe I don't need all of that detail in there. And then I can just say done. And that will set up my teeth to be able to paint. It says it's now prepared for PTEX painting. All right. So at this point, once you have either a UV layout or you have PTEX set up, then you can come into layers and start to add your paint layers. Okay. And we'll look at actual painting in the next lesson, but you can come in here and just create a new layer. This is going to be a PTEX layer. And you can choose whether you want to paint color, diffuse, which is diffuse, specular, gloss, incandescence, bump map, whatever you want to create. You say OK, and then these are the layers that we'll be painting on to create our actual texture maps. All right, so PTEX is one option. Let me go ahead and show everything. Another option would be to do an automatic UV layout. So let's say that that we have, for instance, the gums here. And let me step down to level 0. If we don't have any UVs on these gums, we can actually, in Mudbox, create a real simple automatic UV layout. So we can go in here, go to Create UVs. And if it has UVs, it'll ask you if you want to replace them. So we'll say yes. It'll also ask you how many tiles you want to spread those UVs across. So if you want to get a high resolution, you can spread those across multiple UV tiles. But in this case, we'll just say 1. So now it's going to go through that process. And if we go into our UV View tab, you can see that it has actually broken that up into individual faces and laid out those UVs. You can see it also gives us a nice little buffer between the edge. It doesn't like the UVs to sit right on that edge. Okay. So that's another way. You could use PTEX, or you could use automatic UV layout. You can see when we did PTEX here now that it has created a new material for us because of that PTEX, so that's just something to keep in mind. So PTEX, we've looked at automatic UVs, and then we can also update the UVs in Maya. So let's jump over to Maya and look at a couple of ways that we can get UVs into our scene. So here I've got these pieces, and these are just the low res pieces, and I've just done a quick UV layout on these. If you want more information on doing UVs, we have courses on that. I don't want to focus too much on the actual UV creation, but you just want to go in and create a nice UV layout so that you can start to paint your textures. Okay, you can see I've got a couple of edges in here that can come in, and we can go ahead and sew those together. Okay, and you just want to go through, check your model, and once you have UV layout that you like, there are a few things that we can do. We can just select, for instance, the eyes, and I just want to make sure they're named the same thing as in Mudbox. And I can say, okay, I want to go to File, Send to Mudbox, and I want to update the current scene as we've updated the UVs. So it's going to send that over. It has that high valence vertex. That's fine. We'll keep that. It's going to give us this transfer details box here. And so now we can come in, and let me select the eyes and step down, and you can see that that UV layout has come over from Maya. So now we can add paint layers just as we did with the other piece, start to paint through that. Okay, so I could come in here with our eye selected, go to paint, new layer. We can choose the resolution. We'll call this eye color. The eyes, I'll maybe make a bit smaller in size. We're going to make a color map. So we'll say OK, and now we've got our color texture set up to paint on the eyes. Now another option for us to use is to actually export an OBJ of this. So going into Maya, we can select our object, let's say the head, go to File, Export Selection, and we can export this out and say be head UV. Okay, and we go ahead and export that, and then we'll jump into Mudbox. And let's go ahead and just select our head, go to File, and Import UV. Navigate to our folder here, and we want to choose Head UV, and we'll just open that up. And this is going to give us the option of either matching by vertex ID or by position. Now, if you've done operations which are going to reorder the vertices, you can use position. We haven't done that, so we'll just use vertex ID. Go ahead and say OK to that. Now it's going to bring in that new UV layout that we created in Maya and update it. It uses a little bit different technique here. Okay, so now if we take a look at this, you can see that there are our new UVs. And just to make sure that all of our detail is still there, we can step up the subdivision levels, and you can see that we have all of that data still there. Okay, so just think about if you want to use PTEX, you want to create an automatic UV map here in Mudbox, or you want to do your UVs over in Maya or another 3D application and bring those in and update your model. You can do that as well. Okay, so now that we have kind of our model separated out and we've got the UVs done, let's go ahead in the next lesson and start to paint the material for the texture, paint the texture for the skin. We'll do that in the next lesson.